Hi, I'm Shakti Durga. Welcome to the Goddess Speaks podcast. This is a collection of discourses from the ancient goddess Artha, containing spiritual energy and activations and discussions of those discourses. I hope that the teachings are beneficial to you on your personal journey of enlightenment. I'm now going to move to the review, which we do each week, of the previous week's discourse from the goddess Artha. And someone asked me, who's Artha? How do we know who this Artha goddess is, Arta or Artha? She's known about by the ancient Celts, and she was the goddess after whom King Arthur is named, and also Artemis, the goddess. And we also know that one of the forms of Artha is Isis. And then if we come into the Hindu or Vedic pantheon, then there is an Artha Veda, and also one of the 4 duties of a Vedic householder is Artha. And so the 4 duties are to behave dharmically, to create karma or pleasure for others, Artha, the creation of wealth and beautiful things that everyone can enjoy, and moksha, which means to come into liberation. So I would suggest that Artha is a goddess who's known throughout the world in various ways. And I feel she's very related also to the concept of Lakshmi. I'll go into that some other time. But when I connect with her, I feel very strong throb of Parameshwari, the flavor that I've been guided by for many years. So one of the flavors of Parameshwari. And of course, the more we go on, the more it seems that Parameshwari is really like the Holy Spirit, which is the feminine presence of everything in the earth, of course, and in us, and certainly in Artha and in Amma, in anything sacred. All right, let's go to last week's class. And last week we were given a discourse around evolution and the divine design, human consciousness, mindfulness of divine assistance, how to handle differences, and the purpose of life. So just a small discourse from last week. When the book came, the book of Artha, we were invited to step into the book and to imagine that our consciousness and subtle bodies can come into the pages of the book, which she was showing us as being similar to a garden. And it was crossed by a sort of a lovely little bridge. For me, it was like the Japanese style of bridge. And I felt myself traveling into a beautiful garden. And there were various animal forms greeting us there. We were told that those animal forms were all going to be friendly, regardless if they're wolves or snakes or bisons or whatever they were, that there's nothing here that would harm us. And everything here is an expression of the highest consciousness that's possible for that form of life, expressing as a divine prototype. So that's a very interesting vision for us to be given. And I've had this vision before in a different context at a retreat that we did, our initiates retreat last year at Rafferty's Resort on Lake Macquarie here in Australia, where the grandmothers came. And this is an Aboriginal way of seeing the same thing. The spirits of the species, each of the species, the overarching angelic presence of those species or the divine presence in those species comes as a form that's either animal or we see it as humanoid, but it can morph into that animal. And you'll see the grandmothers, they call them. The Australian Aboriginals see them as the grandmothers, and they'll come in their animal form or their human form. And we saw both at that retreat. It was a very, very overwhelming, powerful experience. Anyway, Artha went on to say, way back in the annals of mankind, the divine gave a prototype for humanity. And it was called Adam Cadman in the Western Mysteries and Lord Manus in the Eastern Mysteries. The divine design for mankind, created by the divine in the image of itself, means the image of the divine is something we have to understand from an expanded perspective, because the divine did not mean physical body. The divine does not look like a human. Made in the image of the divine means made to a divine blueprint and specification into which the divine poured itself. And so in that way, certainly there's an image that was formed by the divine which gave the blueprint for humanity. And we know the divine's within us. The divine design of Adam Cadman is given to humanity for mankind who may share genetic predisposition with other mammals of this particular world on which we live, terra firma. And these animals and mammals share much genetic information with us as well. But the way mankind currently holds its science in this way is not the whole of the truth of the way in which the divine designed us all. Certainly there's a role to play for evolution in the forces that work through humanity, but it's actually a human chain of evolution. And the souls that enter into the human chain of evolution are given a blueprint through which they can work. They come in walking through that blueprint. Some souls also partake of other chains of evolution before becoming human, and these blueprints are somewhere within the distant memory of many of the people on Earth. The people on Earth are not homogenous in their roots. I thought that was really interesting. And that this should be obvious from the great diversity that's to be found within the human families, both in terms of the terrestrial conditioning, and I think she meant climatic conditions and food conditions and how hot it is, how cold it is, but also the colour, the size, the shape, characteristics and qualities embodied in various races and the various temperaments that are different from each other. That this is not random or chance, it's from an evolutionary ethos coming from long ago. That the divine placed itself into the shape of mankind or manas, as it did angelic forms, monkey forms, elephant forms, or any kind of being. The divine placed itself into these shapes for the population of the garden of creation itself, and the various shapes were made to create beauty and love and expressions of divine grace to allow then for there to be evolution and development. The seeds of the race of man were placed here on Earth and other places in the great cosmos. A similar form to our own is having its life. This shouldn't be surprising given the size of the universe and divine design. And it's not necessarily the divine design that these worlds find each other. But there has been some intermingling of the different people from the different worlds over the long course of evolution. The divine has created through so many layers of reality, sort of like the V diagram, but much more nuanced, since time began. Without time, creation can't take its place as there's no stage. There's nowhere to put anything. There can't be any divisions without space and time, and these also come from the divine mind. The illumination that flows through space and time, with the energy that flows through it, has created all the forms that our minds are capable of viewing or understanding or having any cognition about. Arthur was saying there's areas of the cosmos in which speculation is really pleasant if you meditate on those areas. The divine might give visions of various places to those who are interested in cosmology, and there's an interweaving of the many parts as it's given in small parts to everyone who searches. So basically she was saying that the divine design is that people have to share their insights with each other, to co-construct with each other, to get a greater sense of what the totality of reality is all about. I see this bit, you see this bit, another school sees another bit. We put it all together. That the human wishes to own information is part of our ego nature, but not the divine way. The divine way is flow and sharing. This does not diminish whoever it is that brought through the information or through which it came, but it allows the flavour of that being who brought it forth to be shared with the rest of the world. Nor does this prevent there being economics involved in the world in which you find yourself, because that's the way of humanity. It's brought forth the evolutionary plan, and we have to live by the ways and customs and cultures that have been created where we're incarnated. So she was basically saying it's great to share information, but there can be economies of how people receive monetary value. There are big changes coming into the world, and it's important for light workers to fashion a vision of a better world emerging from the chaos that's coming. Your humanity and divine training will stand you in good stead as the world goes through the changes that have been set in motion and which are now unstoppable. So that was interesting, wasn't it? I think we all can feel that that's the case, that things are really changing. The divine will always enter the battlefield when the forces of chaos, divisiveness, and darkness become too large, and there's a kind of a reckoning. This is not judgmental or punitive, but it is definitely the is of rectifying things. Where one finds oneself in the ebb and flow of the tides of change and changing energy depends on the preparation that we've made. Artha said each of us is preparing properly through your spiritual practices for the inevitable changes and evolutions that we'll face in our life. That change is the nature of life on earth as much as we try and stop it. And trying to freeze frame the parts we like is ignoring the reality that it's the evolution of consciousness that's important in our life and not unchanging pleasantness. So the point of life isn't unchanging pleasantness and everything staying the same. It's the evolution of your consciousness. You know from the stories of the various scriptures of the indulgences that the pleasure grounds can bring, and how for some this stifles their spirituality as they rest in the pleasure grounds that are created by the divine for the enjoyment of all. So basically, we're meant to experience pleasure. The divine made it that way. But those who become lost in pleasure don't arouse from their partial slumber to go about the business of sharing, helping, serving, and enabling others to find the pleasurable as well. Instead, it becomes a soporific activity of pleasantness. For those who are entitled under the current system, there are always changes being brought forth. Even the changes in the coastline of countries is part of the plan of the divine, that nothing stays the same forever. Found that very interesting. There'll never be a regime that's entrenched forever, no matter how wonderful it might be or how ghastly it is. And so one can take solace in the fact that it's temporary. Whatever is dominant at any given time is only a cycle in the overall history of humanity. Whether we live in poverty or plenty, this is also a cycle. And the better question is, how do we grow the internal landscape so that we feel connected to the whole of the universe, regardless of where on the cycle we find ourselves at any given time? How do we be in the presence of such truth that we understand there's nothing that can ever block our unification with the divine or get in the way of the vast bliss of inner illumination? The sorrow of letting go of forms or structures or people that we've loved, even through the inevitability of demise of the physical body, or being parted by distance or other circumstances planned and unplanned, that there's always a connection that can never be broken, and it's our spirituality and our training that allows these connections to be steadfast. Throughout whatever change is coming, our vision is steadfast, that the world becomes a better place, a more humane and compassionate society, where the discord of the age we're leaving behind becomes part of the solution for the next age. So I thought that was really interesting too. We take the problems and we turn them into solutions and opportunities. And we're reminded that this is actually the nature of the Vishuddha chakra. It takes something imperfect and finds a way to perfect it. And in doing this, it creates more imbalances and more imperfections, which at a later turn of the spiral requires another adjustment and another reset to occur to shake people out of complacency as we move through the bell curve of usefulness of any idea, of any cycle. And that really it's the path of moderation that's the best for all. The path of moderation means not denying and not hoarding. It means being fluid, that there's vibration. The fluidity allows vibration with the circumstances, and the fixedness of the egoic structure is replaced by a vibrant, responsive consciousness linked to your higher soul. Artha said that getting through the times that are coming will require a lot of love and a lot of patience. And for those whose minds are drawn inexorably into the worst case that could happen and the worst possible abyss, the sympathy of the spiritual hierarchy is with us. For this is the path of suffering. When change stirs the embers of the heart and feelings issue forth, whatever the feelings might be, acknowledge and thank it. But you do have the wherewithal not to allow the negativity of consciousness and the separateness consciousness to be your ruling dominion. So challenge it. Yeah. Of the inner plane, there are so many countless families and shades of light. There are different rays of light given forth by the divine, which are not always compatible with each other. In their own way, they're all full of goodness. From the human perspective, we see light is good and dark is evil. But this kind of metaphor, Artha said, is suitable only for a small child. Within the heavenly realms, imagine that each of the colours on a giant colour wheel gives forth a nuance in consciousness that an entire civilization can be built from, and it has been. And yet one in an olive shade may not sit quietly with one in a purple shade, and yet both in their own way are beautiful. And the way they would go about things would not suit the temperament of the other one. And then starts the demonization of the other. This is not that, that is not this. And through othering, we're separate and different, thus you must be wrong. And it takes great ones to be able to solve these dilemmas and not plunge humanity further into chaos. One can see through current world events the effect one person can have in plunging the world into chaos. One can have good intentions, but because of the divisive nature of consciousness, they can be deluded and never know they're deluded. And this is possible for anyone, no matter what level they've attained. For in everyone who's still on the earth plane, there's some area in which delusion can set itself in train. So it's not really about, do we ever get deluded? Because I think Artha's saying, well, yes, you do. She's saying it's how quickly can you pick this up and rectify the consciousness? That's the question, not whether or not you'll ever get deluded. With the sweetness and grace, you can come back from a mistake, and that's what perfumes the soul. These are the things that bring forth the attention of the hierarchies of light that will lift you over even the most difficult hurdles. And of course, for egos, no one likes to think they were wrong. And people will cling to the most absurd propositions because they've invested a part of their ego in it. It doesn't matter how much evidence is presented to tell them, you know what, that's ridiculous. They will never let it go. And that's a person in whom the light becomes dim because they just waft off into a delusional place. Whereas what we're told is, pray to wake up from your delusions. Pray to wake up from that which is self-serving, which is basically inherently nasty and pointing fingers at others as being bad, and instead come into the light of your own behavior and pay attention. So she said that each of us are connected to a great army of light beings who are at our disposal, but we have to create relationship with those beings. Without the relationship, us in our human beingness can't quite grasp the handles and ladders of light that the angelic realms are always putting in front of us. Those go unseen as we're busy in our delusions, and we walk straight through them. The idea of paying greater attention walks hand in hand with the teaching that's become more mainstream, called mindfulness. Mindfulness means awareness of the current moment with acceptance. Paying attention, in the common vernacular, it means paying attention to what your physical reality is doing in the moment. But Artha said there's a lot more to mindfulness than what's happening in the physical world, even though I felt she was delighted with mindfulness of what's going on in the physical world, because that itself is a partial answer to delusion. But she said there's also bringing our mind to that which is beyond the physical. We can start to become more mindful of the guidance that one is receiving, more mindful of the connection to the inner plane beings. One can appreciate the patterns that are set forth by the divine through the various chains of evolution, which are ladders for us to climb with handrails and guide rails and even seats for us to rest on from time to time. So she was basically saying the help that's available is graciously abundant. Because of humanity's entrenchment to what it currently perceives to be correct and incorrect, right and wrong, divine and not divine, most of the help that's available isn't perceived. This does not make the divine sad, because the divine is incapable of sadness or disappointment. There's nothing you can do to make the divine happy or not happy. However, there is a blazing of love when you turn your attention towards the divine. When you give a little love to the divine, it will douse you with love. And that flowering and blazing, I suppose you would say it's a concentration of pleasure in the divine. This is not a reward, says Artha, but a result of your own inherent loveliness, that you're beginning to feel more of your loveliness. and thus you can love. You know the law of karma, and it's a truth that many find difficult to accept, that the law of karma operates differently depending upon how exalted your consciousness has become. So here she goes off on another lesson. When the consciousness has become exalted, the path is narrower. So the further you go, the road becomes narrower. We sort of know that. There's less margin for error allowed within the folds of the graciousness of karma. Isn't that a lovely term? Within the folds of the graciousness of karma. Because often we think of karma as being harsh, but according to Artha, well, it's not harsh, it's as gracious as it can be. If we're paying attention, it doesn't have to get harsh. So the power of one who wields power is so great it can be miscued, and that will create mayhem. So at the same time, anything that one does to assist someone who is an exalted one on this planet creates a reflection in your own karma that's multiples of time greater than it would be for a being of lesser consciousness. So what she's saying is that assisting beings that hold the vastest amounts of light will change you and your consciousness and will exalt you in your life. She said the beings of whom I speak will already have plans within their field to lift humanity. And you might think, why don't we just lift each individual ourselves? And she said, well, you can. But by assisting the great ones who already have plans to lift the whole of humanity in some way, it brings a manifold expression of divine grace that will be super effective in lifting everyone. It's as though as one's consciousness expands into the infinite light and love, which is the potential of all of us, that things get louder. The effect of any action issues more throughout the cosmos, and we enter into the fields by our love for such great exalted beings. So when we love these great exalted beings, they lift us into those fields, the fields of opportunity to make a difference. And in so doing, people are lifted in ways beyond their comprehension, as well as through the efforts of the group endeavour. So think about the projects that any exalted one has. So an exalted one, I guess, is someone who's working for the good of humanity. You can look at Amma and all of Amma's projects, how helping in any of those projects is important. You can even look at Shanti Mission. We have projects for the good of humanity. And when we work on those projects, we're assisting in a big way. So the divine has designed humanity in such a way that group effort is required, and not all groups work in the same way. What's correct in one group will be incorrect in another group. And that is not incorrect, says Artha. It's correct. What's required for diversity is not to make one right and one wrong, but to see that both are working in different ray types, in different families of divine grace, working towards the one commonality that they'll eventually find, like we all will. And that it's good in any stage of consciousness to continue the work of love, to find the spark of love and divine in any being. Artha said, be patient with this work and allow yourself to unfold into this work, because finding the good and the spark of love in any being is like an insurance policy against your own error. To understand that the human mind is not the optimal instrument of consciousness and should always be a servant of the higher soul, which basically flourishes in love. When you make the mind the glorified instrument of consciousness, it wishes to restrict its field of operation to that which is physical and tangible, and other things are relegated to a less important place in your life. Have you noticed that? I have, at times when I get very agitated or anxious, or my mind is just running everything. It's just, I have to do this, I have to do that, and it's all the physical stuff. And then we don't have time for spiritual practices. You don't have time for this. So Artha says, this is turning reality inside out and upside down. For the greatest and most real things are those you can't see. They're the most great and real things in any chain of evolution because we feel them internally. We know them spiritually. You're one with them energetically. And they're the essence of your happiness and joy. The physical things that flow from these states are merely evidence of our inner state. And those who say you have to feel it before we make it, are speakers of the light, she said. And that means that you need to really be able to envisage any good that you want to move towards. You really got to feel it in your own state, and that this will help bring it in. And she said, have faith that through any portal of change, there'll be karmic gains and losses, but don't lament them. Just play your part to help anyone we can help, to stay connected to the divine in each other, and to know that beyond the transformation comes new opportunity and new solidarity. And she was very firm about a kinder and more generous world is possible. And if you can hold your center in your vision through the eye of a storm, then a lot of assistance will be with you all the time. And when it gets too hard, call on the divine so that you get carried. And she said, have faith that you're being watched over and that help will always be available to you. And she then told us the ultimate objective of your life is self-realization, the power to love more than you've ever loved before, and to help raise human consciousness to a whole new level for a whole new and wonderful earth to evolve and then be formed and maintained for the whole human family. I'm going to read that again because she basically was saying this is what self-realization is for humans. She said the ultimate objective you have in your life is self-realization, the power to love more than you've ever loved before, and to help raise human consciousness to a whole new level for a whole new and wondrous earth to evolve, then be formed and maintained for the human family. So that's what we should be working towards. Isn't that great? I love it. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Goddess Speaks. If so, please share it with your friends and your family so they can benefit too. If you'd like to connect with me, visit my website, shaktidurga.com.